Welcome, everyone. Here is another edition tonight of Homestead from Scratch series. And we're going to talk a little bit tonight about building the soil. And so welcome, everybody. What's up, John? What's up, Logan? How are you guys doing? How was your week?
Everything's great with me. As I told you before we got started, I've had pond issues for a couple of years now, and I finally got somebody out here to try to fix it, and I think he did a really good job. But we will only know when it starts raining. And since that's a couple of days off, we won't know how well he did. But I'm pretty confident he tackled the problem. He found a hole where it's probably leaking and patched it. So I'm hoping that does it, because that's what I want to use as my main water source for my cattle, and pump it into a tank and at the high point on my property, and then gravity feed everything from there, which is good permaculture design there, using
Your terrain.
What's that?
Using your terrain, your natural terrain.
Right. It's a low tech, almost no tech, approach, which obviously those are much more resilient and sustainable than, what's the term? Like the guy that names after all those crazy contraptions. There's a name for it.
A Rube Goldberg.
Yeah. Instead of a Rube Goldberg setup where you've got things pieced together and it's kind of working, kind of not. It's fragile, stuff breaks. You want to try to make it as resilient possible. So that's my plan. That's my week. Finally planted some ryegrass on my garden plot and start my cover crop for the winter. I'll be planting some greens and stuff along in there as well, that'll grow throughout most of the winter, depending on our winter. But that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Nice, man. Sounds like you got a lot going on.
Always.
Yep. What's up with you, Logan? You got yourself injured somehow?
I talked to you about it Saturday morning. I was gonna head over to your property, and I thought, I guess I could hobble a little bit, and then you said you were sick, and I thought, well, I wasn't glad you were sick, but I was kind of glad you were sick because I was not able to put a lot of pressure on my foot, and I was kind of planning on just cutting and having you tote everything, which would make me seem kind of lazy, but it was I punctured my foot, the bottom of my foot, to where I could barely walk. Like the first night was just excruciating pain. Couldn't put any pressure on it. I'd be laying there trying to get relaxed, and I guess it hit a nerve, and it would just make my leg kick randomly, and I'd have real sharp pain come through my leg. I think if it wouldn't have hit the bone, then it would have went all the way through my foot. But it was a little sapling, probably about the size of my finger or even smaller. That was somebody had been clearing around this double wide that I was working on, and I think it was cut at an angle. And of course, all of my weight came down on one foot, went straight through my shoe up into my foot. Yeah, it's rough. So, been trying to get stuff. Luckily, my wife's good with the animals and everything, so she's taking care of my all of our animals, because she does help out here and there too. But that was really helpful, not having to hobble around tending to animals. But feeling a lot better today. A lot of the soreness is gone, but it's still hard to walk. You don't realize how much you need your feet until you've injured one. It's just like a finger. You think like, oh, well, I don't use my pinky that much, but then you injure your pinky. and it's like I can't do anything.
Yeah, that's like when you crack a rib and someone says it hurts, like only when I breathe.
Man, I got sick from a coworker, I guess, working around him. He had come into work sick, and
Is this the dude with the really bad diet?
well, I think it pretty much a lot of people that I work with probably have a pretty bad diet, but no, this was when I went up to Nashville to work, and he had been out for 3 days, and then he had come in the day I was up there, and so the next week I came down with whatever, probably the coof. I probably had the coof because I can't smell or taste anything. And I guess this is the second time I got that, but I think I jinxed myself because I went on and talked with Nicole Sauce about my health journey, and I told her I had not gotten sick, and so I jinxed myself on that one. I got sick this week, and I was down for about 3 days, pretty bad, but I'm better now, kind of. I still got a little bit of the crud in my head and still coughing up some stuff, but other than that, I'm feeling pretty good. So anyway, the topic for tonight was talking about building the soil, and I know that both of you guys have a lot of experience and are really or very interested in this topic about the soils and what we need to do to work on improving our soils and various conditions and states that all of our soils are in and on our own properties. So John, what we were talking a little bit earlier before this, you're going to be doing this cover crop thing, and
Yes.
What kind of things have you seen on your property running the cattle and doing the regenerative cattle, moving them on its improvement of the soils? Have you done any testing with your soils yet? And
I test.
what are you seeing?
I test about every 3 years, because if I do put out some lime or something, for the pasture, I want to make sure that I'm not adding too much, or that, if it's in range, if it's not any crazy deficiencies, I'm not going to mess with it, But when I first, it's been 2 years since I had it tested and had some lime and a couple other things that were missing in the soil. And I'll be real interested in it next year when I test again, because my thinking on it's changed a little bit about that. I've gotten to know the pasture a little bit better, what it needs, what it doesn't, only from observation, right? You can only you can't really know until you do a soil test, but you can if things are growing well, you can assume that the soil, at least from a nutrient standpoint. But I think, and like I said, my thinking is evolving a little bit, and that's just from my some reading I've done and some work I've done and experiments I'm doing right now. Like I told you, I'm putting a cover crop in on my garden for the first time this year, because even as gardeners, even to some extent permaculture people, they're really focused on the nutrients in the soil and stuff like that. Not so much permaculture people, because they have a deeper understanding how the soil works. But your average person is like, well, I'm going to get me some Miracle Grow or some whatever, because I want big tomatoes, right? or what, right? I want, because that's what everybody does, right? I mean, that's in the basically, in the thought and in the mind space of most home gardeners, because they don't have a deep understanding of soil, how it functions, what makes it better, what can possibly hurt it. So getting back to at least the thing I was talking about is a cover crop. And I was a little conflicted on cover crops because you have this idea of the nutrients in the soil and depleting it by, well, if you're growing crops during the summer, tomatoes, and then you're growing a cover crop, mine's is ryegrass, the grain, not the grass, right? The stuff that gets balls. It's cereal ryegrass or winter ryegrass. There's a couple different names. So if you go to do it, don't get the ryegrass that you put on your lawn. I mean, it'll work. But I mean, for my purpose, there's 2 or 3 reasons why I'm doing this, and I'll let you in on that. One is one of the things about soil health is you want to keep the soil covered in growing material all year long, if possible, and that provides a number of different things. And I learned a lot of this from pasture management is, you don't want to graze it down and have really short grass and nothing living in your soil during the wintertime, because when the rains come, that what's growing, that foliage, that plant, it actually slows down the impact of rain, and that causes erosion. And you can really start washing a lot of soil away if it's not protected. And protection means there's something growing in the soil, and there's somewhat of a forage base there that, it's not just hitting. Because if you ever seen, these slow motion cameras of, dirt, and then a drop of rain hits it, it's like a mini nuclear explosion. It just scatters the soil everywhere. And then once that's loosened from the soil, and the water will start moving it downhill, and pretty soon you get erosion. So erosion is one thing, although I'm not that worried about it in my garden because that's fairly flat and you're really not going to do a whole lot to harm it. But the second thing is to have something in the soil living at all times. And that's where I started getting conflicted. It's like, well, it's going to use up all the nutrients in there. But once you learn about soil health, those nutrients are there because there are roots in the ground, and they're constantly year-round interacting with the microbes, creating more and more nutrients for your soil. So that's why you want to have it there year-round. It's, the only thing it's probably going to deplete a little, and it's real easy to add back, whether through compost or if you want to use commercial fertilizer, is nitrogen. You can put that, because nitrogen is the most freely, it's used up quite quickly, and it's not replaced very easily unless you have some nitrogen. Even the so-called nitrogen fixing plants out there really don't add a lot of nitrogen to the soil unless you turn that into the soil. And because the nitrogen is in some of it's in the roots, but it's mainly in, like clover, it's in the actual leaves. So until you terminate it and put it back into the soil, it really doesn't add a lot of nitrogen. There's what it doesn't do is use up the available nitrogen that might be in the soil, which is a positive. But anyway, getting on with that, it's all about keeping those microbes happy, which is what is going to feed your plants. It's not, everybody's like, oh, well, I need to put, nutrients in my soil to feed my plant. It's like, no, you need to let the microbes do their job, and they'll do that. That's their job, is to feed the plant. That's why they exist. That's how they exist. It's probably one of the least known areas of, say, I guess biology would probably be the field, is that we just really don't know much about bacteria. We don't know a whole lot about fungus. I saw this one pie chart, and if you take the species of every animal or living cell, I guess we'll call that, on Earth, that probably 75 to 80% of all species on the Earth are bacteria. And we've only identified a small fraction of them. And we don't know what they do. We're so far behind in understanding how soil works that's why at least having some knowledge is very powerful, because we just don't know. It's still an area where they're doing research. And so so getting back to my cover crop, keeping that in the soil. Now there's a third reason why I'm especially using cereal rye, because it'll grow. It grows like a short grass during the wintertime, but in the spring it sends up, its seed head, and it'll grow up to 4 or 5 feet tall, and it's pretty heavy stem. It's got a big seed head on it. And so what I'm doing, instead of adding, the very popular way of doing gardening is like wood chip gardening. You put wood chips down and stuff like that, which is fine. It works. There's a few things you have to be aware of when you do that. But it's actually green plant matter. And I'm also trying to do a kind of a no-till approach to my garden. And I have a great Troy-built tiller that you chew up just about anything, which is really nice in this rocky soil. But anyway, what you do is you terminate it at a certain point in the spring and early summer, and you basically bend it over. It's called crimping. You crimp that over, and you do it all in one direction. So these big tall seed heads and stems are laying down, and it's like a woven reed mat that you just lay over top of your garden. So again, that protects it from rain and it keeps moisture in. It's like a mulch layer. And by the end of the summer, the microbes have eaten it and used food to obviously feed your plants. So this is a three-pronged approach this year that I'm trying, and that as I learn about soil health a little bit more, I think it's worth doing. Because I've tried a couple other approaches, and I don't want to, I'm kind of with Logan. Is like, well, okay, the science might not be there, but all I know is I put this on my garden and this grew and that didn't. When I put this, you did a little experiment. Like I put compost tea on these tomato plants, and this I just, water and maybe, some mulch around it or whatever. You got to do the experiment, right? Regardless of what the manufacturers say and the experts say, you've got to do the experiment yourself. And it's a great thing to experiment, because you learn, as we all find out, I can grow things on my property that if I tried the same thing on Logan's, might not work, or yours, Greg. And it's like, you've got to do what works, and you got to continually push the envelope and find out what works, because there will be a sweet spot there. You just need to be smart, continue to do some smart testing. If you spent a lot of money buying some fancy stuff and it didn't work, don't kid yourself and think it worked. If it didn't work, it didn't work. You need to move on. Don't let your pride get it, because if what I'm doing doesn't work, I won't be doing it next year, right? I'll go down the list and go, okay, maybe I need to maybe I should put more compost on and less, cover crop or whatever it might be. So it's probably the soil health is the single most important thing to success of anybody's garden, because we're all aware of the two main things that plants need. You need to make sure it gets enough light. It's not too shady. If it grows in the shade, it's not out in the blistering sun. And the second thing is it gets enough water, right? That's what pretty much anybody can figure those things out. But the part about the soil health and the nutrients and stuff like that, it's going to take time. Don't think your first year as a gardener is going to be, this bumper crop and you're just going to have so much food that, you won't know what to do with. Likely not going to happen because you haven't learned how to do it yet, right? And there's you can watch YouTube videos and read books, but until you're actually have your hands in the dirt on your property in your context. I mean, this is a drought year. This was a horrible, horrible year. I have trees that I hope didn't die, but they basically went dormant in the middle of summer. I mean, just basically dropped most of their leaves, and they're just sitting there. And I go test the limbs and like, are they crisp and do they snap off, or are they still a little bit, have some life in it? And hopefully they come back next year. But I'm surprised, dude. 2 years of drought in a row, and these trees are really suffering. And it's and you can't. And living on a big farm, you don't have time to individually water and baby these things all summer long in a drought. It's just not possible. But anyway, so long-winded answer, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. And like I said, I still, I'm looking for different ways to do things that make sense.
I'm thinking about maybe investing in a microscope because of understanding how big the microorganisms in the soil are for the health of your plants and everything.
Right.
So just testing for like the level of microorganisms in your soil is something that I'm looking into.
Well, and that's one of the things I'm learning. I really started digging into the microbes in the soil because that's kind of that's the key, right? And I think we have a misunderstanding about that because we're in this linear, reductionist sort of mindset when it comes to things. It's like, okay, we have microbes are important for the soil. So let me go buy a big bottle of microbes and spray it all over my garden. And it's like that's the normal consumer reductionist. If I'm sick, I need to take more vitamin C, so I'll just take like 500,000 grams of vitamin C until I'm sick or whatever. But microbes are very specific to the soil. Your soil right now is at 100% capacity of microbes. And until you change something in your soil, you can dump 1,000 times more microbes than you currently have, and they will end up in a very short period dying. Because the holding capacity, which comes from living roots in the ground, compost, which is, kind of the decayed matter that they live off of, that's their food, So unless you change that calculus of your soil, just throwing microbes at it, it's not going to work because they're on everything. They're in the air. They're on every leaf, on every piece of soil. They're pervasive everywhere. You just need to give them what they need to flourish. Therefore, your plants can flourish. And that's the missing link, I think, for a long time I didn't understand. Because I was going out and buying microbes, effective microbes. That was the big thing, get these, mix them in a solution, spray it on your garden. And it does help, but it does help in a way, which is another function of microbes is they're constantly eating each other. The big ones eat the small ones, and it's just a constant thing in nature. But when they die, they're full of nutrients and they die. It's like, planting, composting animals, it's like there's a lot of nutrients in there and it'll eventually break down in the soil and, be food for whatever. So yeah, anyway, so that's kind of the story there.
Yeah, there's so much here. I know, Logan, you've been working on doing composting, different techniques, and biochar and all that kind of stuff. Like, what kind of stuff have you noticed about working on your soils and attempting to improve your soils in your area?
Well, I guess I'll start out. I know that John is also a fan of the book Trees of Power, and I like Akiva Silver's philosophy on like caring for souls and building souls. He says that building soul is like religion. Everyone has a different way, and everyone thinks their way is the right way. Mm-hmm. And it's 100% true. Everybody's got these ideas that this is the way you do things. And I'll just give you my philosophy on soil health. And I think that mine would probably apply to the majority of people. If you think about your body, and it's funny because I was just having a conversation with a good friend of mine um, over the weekend, and me and her were talking about how herbalism and how important it is to know the uses for plants. But then again, how important modern medicine is. There's a lot of stuff in modern medicine that we need. I mean, if I get in a car wreck, I don't care how much comfort you give me. I need somebody that is skilled to operate and sew me back up and, get me back to where I need to be. So like for example, with soil tests, I think if you're having, say like you had a bunch, which, never Google, do I have cancer? Because if you do that, everyone has cancer. But if you have like a lot of cancerous symptoms, it's like, hey, you know what? Maybe I should go see a doctor and have him, test me for this. But if you've got something that's just like, I just feel like I'm bloated a lot. Well, let's check out your diet. Let's see if there's not something that's maybe not quite balanced. Maybe you need to exercise a little bit more. There's a lot of stuff. And I think we need to look at soils like that too. If you have a real bad issue, like John's talking about, like just something won't grow here, or you're having some kind of disease just over and over again, maybe it's time to look and say, like, hey, what's the big thing that we're lacking? Now, for me, though, for the most part, if you're not having any really big issues, I think that just good practices of upping that holding capacity of your soil, whether it be for microbes, water, or whatever else that the plant might need, that if you do that, then your soils are just going to improve. Back, a few hundred years ago, people, when they improved soils, or, a few thousand years ago, as far as we know, they didn't have anything compared to the technology that we have nowadays. So they weren't out there testing soils. They were also not destroying soils as much as we are nowadays. There's huge tillage on mass scale. There's a lot of leaching from fertilizers and manure lagoons and et cetera, pollution from big industries. There's a lot of stuff that's going on that's causing damage. And we've had these bad practices, so we can't expect everything just to get better overnight. But one thing that I was just thinking about here, as far as things that soil needs, and this is coming from my experience of testing a lot of these methods, the one thing they need is water, right? They need a proper diet and sunlight. All three of those things apply to us as well. So if you kind of treat the soil like yourself, you're a bunch of microbes too. I think it's only, what is it? It's like something like 60 or 80% of our DNA is actually bacteria, and it's only like a certain percentage that is actual human DNA. So we're kind of, especially if you go into like a philosophical realm of like religion and everything, we're taken from the soul. So we have that same kind of biology in us. And like John was saying about the cover crops, there are certain microbes in the soil that only feed on certain root exudates. And if you don't have any roots in there producing those exudates, you're not going to have the microbes. There's certain ones that feed on composting matters. That's why I think that it's not necessarily like, hey, if you'll just do cover crops, you're good. Or if you'll just compost, or if you'll just mulch, you're good. The more of those practices that you incorporate, the better the soil is going to be. Just for an example, I think I was showing Greg on camera. Well, I actually showed John too. We went out, or I took the camera out at night. We were talking a little bit after, and I was looking at some of our zucchini plants and our milo plants that are out there. And the ones that look the most robust have a combination of soil practices on them. So the ones that looked kind of okay, they had tons of compost and tons of mulch. And they're all planted around perennials. The ones that looked phenomenal had all of those nutrients and had a ton of biochar. The holding capacity of the soil was boosted, and so there were more microbes. I mean, that's you can deduce these things yourself without having to go out and get a microscope, which I do not. I'm not against in the least. I love a channel on YouTube that's called Into the Microverse. I'm pretty sure it's put on by PBS, and the guy that's on there, he does super high quality video of all these microbes that they find from water samples and soil samples. Really interesting to watch. But yeah, all of those practices, and there's so many. So some of the ones that I've been really focusing on is mulch and the biochar. Both of those are extremely important. And I'm about to get into more of like cover cropping, although I do focus more on perennials. So I focus on perennials that are in the soil. But as we continue to expand our gardens and get into growing, more annual crops and not focusing as much on the meat as we have on the homestead, I want to get into stuff like cover crops because, like John said, having that living root in the soil is what feeds those microbes. And those microbes, in turn, a lot of times will feed the roots. There's, a lot of plants that are carnivorous, not just like, a Venus flytrap, but, just your everyday average looking plants that you wouldn't think's eating any kind of meat. They're eating tons of microbes. So there's always some form of food that is going to really make a specific plant grow and be happy. So we have to think about all of those. But yeah, my most of my experience is in increasing the holding capacity and increasing the nutrient and minerals that those microbes have access to. Cover cropping, not super knowledgeable about that, except for what I know about root exudates and the fact that those microbes and other plants benefit from the exudates of, certain plants. That's pretty much the extent of my knowledge on that one.
Okay, well, we got a question in from Miss Sean 43 is asking, do you think it is okay to use waste from the cannabis industry? I can get tons of peat, perlite, cocoa core, and trimmings from the plants. What do you
Oh
guys
man,
think?
who's out there wasting cannabis? Man, that's not right. No, I know Miss Sean, been on my channel for a long time. I wouldn't see anything wrong with it. I can't think of anything that would be, the thing is everything. Let me say this is, and now I'll turn it back over to you, Greg, and you, John, see what your opinion is on it. But when we talk about using waste from certain industries, I think the thing that we need to look at most is, does it have any pesticides? Does it have any herbicides? Is there any kind of heavy metals, stuff like that? Is there anything that has polluted this source? Because that's really the only thing you've got to worry about. Just for example, black walnut is extremely high in juglones, right? It's the highest one. I've cut black walnut before, and the sawdust, when it got on my skin, actually made me break out. That's how high in juglones it is. But if you allow the leaves, wood, and the husk and nuts and everything to compost for just about a couple of weeks, all that goes away. So if you're composting and doing it in a way, or if you're mulching in a manner that it's not going to poison your plants, I don't see any issue with using any organic material that is, from a plant, animal, stuff like that. But that's just my opinion. I would probably do a little more research on anything if you weren't sure about it, but I think it'd be perfectly fine.
Yeah, I'll second that. Is if you can verify, where you're getting it from and the practices that they use, and the cannabis industry is fairly well known for, because it's actually consumed and people actually, this fairly organic, the way it's grown. Commercial hemp, maybe not so much. I think that's just kind of a crop. So make sure this is from a cannabis industry and not a hemp farm. because they'll use whatever they can on hemp, because it's used for all sorts of making clothes, whatever, right?
Concrete.
So they don't really care about that. But maybe they do. I know very little about the cannabis industry other than they're really into permaculture and organic approaches because that's what their customers want, right? I think, it's quote unquote a drug, but people want it in its most natural, cleanest form, right? Because they're either inhaling it or eating it or whatever they do with it. So if you can do the research on that, if you can't do the research on it, and I'll kind of go back to my sciencey hat on that, you can probably have that tested for the worst pesticides and herbicides to make sure it's not in there. I know people do that in my industry, in the cattle industry. They have their hay tested if they buy a lot of hay and feed a lot of hay, then because they don't want that obviously in their cows, so it's worth it. If it's a small garden and, okay, we're just fooling around with this. But if it's fairly substantial and you put a lot of work into it and your food source is coming from this and it's not just kind of a hobby and a nice to have, I would go to the extra step in making sure that it comes from a clean source if you can. I mean, if you can't, like Logan said, a lot of these things, even the natural pesticides like from black walnut, a lot of those things, thanks to the microbes, they break that stuff down and they basically render it insoluble to where it's not going to affect any other parts of the plant. So yeah, I hope that's a fairly decent answer there. But like I said, I don't have a whole lot of experience with the cannabis growing industry.
Nah, the only thing I could tell you is I think that a lot of the cannabis, I believe it basically the THC is its own kind of pesticide or whatever. So those trichomes that are growing on the THC are its like own way of protecting the plant itself. So I don't really think that anybody that is growing cannabis is going to be spraying any kind of pesticide on it or anything like that.
Yeah. Well, so I will tell you this, that now these are growers that I know of that they have been doing it for a very long time, and so it's not necessarily your legal channels of growing marijuana, but they kept everything indoors because of pest problems, because there were certain things in their area that really attacked the cannabis plants. And so I know that even those guys, instead of spraying, they just said, hey, we're just going to grow indoors because we don't want everything eating our crop up. And so I would say it's pretty safe. I think there's just probably a few that are really getting into more of a commercial-ish type space that are actually doing any kind of spraying or anything that would be harmful to your garden. There's also a test you can do. I know I've heard Jack Spirko mention this on the Survival podcast of just taking like a legume, some kind of bean or something. And like if you get hay, like John said, you can soak that hay in a bucket of water and then water that bean plant with that water that the hay's been soaking in. And if that bean plant dies, it's not safe. If it does fine and just continues growing like nothing happened, you're probably okay. Maybe not. There might still be something in there. You don't know unless you really broke it down and tested it, but it's a good little quick, hey, is this, something I can use or not?
Yeah, and using seedlings are a really, really good way of doing that because they're so vulnerable to any sort of contamination when they're especially really young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if there's anything in there that isn't quite the way it should be, it's a good test. And and that kind of, that's a great question, because that kind of leads us into, I guess, another topic, although it was not necessarily planned, but any inputs that you bring onto your property to use on your garden, just be aware of all those things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, cow manure.
Yeah, because I thought about
You know.
like collecting trimmings and stuff from around the neighborhood and using that and composting it, but like, I guess it may be somewhat of a risk. Like if I go into a suburban neighborhood where, they have chemically treated lawns and they may spray Roundup in some of their stuff. And, I don't know exactly what they're doing to treat their yards and who's doing their landscaping. So I thought about that, and like maybe like or in and around where my parents' neighborhood is, because it's like it's like everybody lives in the woods, and so there's not like really many like manicured lawns or whatever, but sometimes people will throw their some of their stuff out to the curb or whatever, and that'd probably be fine. But like going across the road into the manicured subdivision or whatever, I don't know. Like people throw their stuff away all the time, but I don't necessarily know if that might be good for composting or not. But it's always a struggle, right? Like I need more organic material to put in the soil to compost year after year, so I'm looking for stuff to throw in there. So
I've done some harvesting of areas along roadsides, in people's yards from customers that I have. And you have to be very careful. You're right. I mean, you've got to be sure about stuff. And you can tell a lot of times. There's like, if you're ever driving down a road, I think I might've made a video about this, but if you're ever driving down a road and all the trees look like this, it's like you've got the trees are growing up, right? And let me get my hand to where you'll be actually able to see it. And then it goes like this, right? And here's the road. And so it's like everything's growing out over the road, but it goes up a ways and stops. Normally, unless you can see where big limbs have been chopped off, because a lot of times when they come through and they cut with those blades, it'll all be just straight alongside the tree. When you see that, the sprayers only reach so high. And so you'll have this kind of aesthetic to the road. And so you want to try to avoid those places because they have for sure sprayed the fire out of that stuff. And
I saw that. I'm driving down 65 from Pulaski, and it's like they just went with the big truck with the big spray wand. And they weren't even looking. They're just driving down the road, and there's some, and they look like, I guess, probably cedars or something like that. They're, because they grow pretty much from the ground up. They don't have a lot of trunk to them, not exposed trunk at least. And probably a good 10 feet off the ground, it was just brown all the way to the ground. The thing is, it at least at this point, it hasn't killed the tree, but it just wiped it out. Probably like the first 10 feet is just it was brown. They'd probably sprayed it a week before I drove by it because the top was nice and green still. So
and all that there will die and eventually fall off, and that's why you'll see in certain places it just looks like an upside down L shape on the side of the road, and it's where they sprayed. As far as like the biomass goes, if you manage your property right, in my opinion, you should never have a need to bring in biomass from anywhere else. Just the biomass. Now, I'm talking about like, stripping carbon out of the air, putting it into plants, and having that to build with. As far as nutrient and minerals, something that I'm a huge advocate of. Now, I am all about people getting more independent and not having to go and buy from the feed store. A lot of my channel is about that stuff. But I think that buying feed for animals to turn into meat, as long as it's a good feed, you get something that's pretty decent quality. You think about like with my rabbits, everything that that rabbit pellet has what a rabbit needs as far as their minerals and nutrient, and it's in a form that they're able to consume, digest, and build their bodies with. If I take that manure and anything that they've left in that, and I take the rest of their body, whatever I don't eat, and we cycle those nutrients back into the soil and get those microbes in there where they can make that stuff bioavailable inside of the plants again. I think that if you can just get something on your property to where you can, cut a lot of grass and pile it up and make compost, take all of your leaves, take all your sticks, take everything, compost it along with the manures, make your biochar, and then buy your feed as a fertilizer. Now, like John has mentioned, if you've got like an extreme calcium deficiency or a selenium deficiency or an iron, whatever it might be that you don't have in the soil, if you get that tested, you might go and you might spread some lime just because you really need it. But also making that stuff bioavailable and passing it through an animal is the easiest and fastest way to do that. They, break that stuff down and make it bioavailable. It reminds me of back when I used to keep aquariums. All of my aquariums, it was that they were all run on bubblers, and people were like, well, how do you do them without a filter? It's like the whole tank's the filter. The gravel, the plants, the fish themselves, they're the ones that are filtering the water. And in the nitrogen cycle inside of the tank, you've got ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite. And until you get the bacteria built up in that tank to process each one of those into the next stage, you're never going to get that nitrogen cycle going. And so I think it's really important. I really could just say amen to what John said, and then we wouldn't be talking about this anymore. But getting that holding capacity up, like you said, making a place for those microbes to be, whether you need something like biochar, whether you need something that they can decompose, or you need, a living root in the soil, you got to get those things going so that way all that stuff can be processed. And so for me, as far as the compost, Greg, I like the idea of using everything that you've got. If you can get stuff from other places too, great. But taking like animal feeds and processing that through the animals, that there is a great soil practice. And I've seen huge results in mulching with my rabbit manure and leaves on my willow plants. I mean, they grow like gangbusters when I do that. And so just, all those little things, I don't know if it's necessary to have a lot of inputs. Yeah, of course, if your soil ain't got it, it ain't got it. If it's not bioavailable, it's not bioavailable. But I think there's a lot we can do without having to go and be like, I need to find somewhere where I can get, 8 truckloads of wood chips, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've tried different things on my folks' property, including the wood chips, and then adding minerals like I think I added like this azomite stuff at one point in time.
Rock dust, yeah.
Rock dust, and I learned that you gotta really like spread that pretty thin, because it can if you put too much of a concentration in one area, it basically like turns your soil into a rock. I mean,
Oh, wow.
we kind of went a little overboard on adding that stuff into the garden at one point, and it just compacted the soil so bad. So and then we would go from doing the till, and now I do more of a no-till method, but I will break up the compaction in the soil with one of those broad forks now, because I believe you do need to decompact the soil. But yeah, and then a buddy of ours has a ton of sheep, so sometimes he'll let us get some sheep manure, and we'll add that. But yeah, and then we've been doing the biochar thing as well, and feeding that to the chickens, and hopefully just them moving them around because we're chicken tractoring them getting fed the biochar and pooping that out on the ground and, inoculating it in a certain regard and moving that over the garden bed area and all that kind of stuff. Hopefully that's kind of biocharing the soils as well. And over time that'll build up. But that's kind of our approach that we're working on right now.
Yeah. Well, I'll Logan's comment about manure and how important that is. Unfortunately, I have plenty of cows, so that's not necessarily, which I haven't been collecting, because I haven't started my fall compost pile yet, which is a whole nother story. But the great thing about that, especially manure, is the way animal digestive systems work is, especially cows, and they've eaten the grass, and when it comes out as manure, the microbes have already done 90% of the work breaking that down. And and so it's about as the most natural type of a fertilizer that you can, and humans have known that since they started domesticating animals, right? They're just like, oh, this stuff works great on the garden. I don't know what's in it, but it's great.
Yeah, animal manure is probably the best stuff
but then again, not everybody has animals or enough animals to create enough compost, or but even a little bit is helps, because that kind of inoculates the compost pile with all those microbes from the cow's gut, and will continue to break it down. So that, and again, as long as you have a trusted source of that manure, and how those cows are, they're not being given vaccines or wormer or all sorts of other stuff that just basically kills the biology, some of the biology. They don't stop the cows from digesting, but it's still harmful to certain microbes. It's probably one of the best things. And and there's other, maybe we can do, well, actually this show kind of almost turned into a composting show. We probably should do one just on that subject, because it is fascinating. Like you said, Logan, it's like it's like a religion. There's a certain way to do it, and my way's the best. And I'm sorry, but you're just not.
Yep.
Compost isn't that good.
Everybody who doesn't compost like me goes to compost hell.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I've been in the YouTube comments a time or two.
Yeah, and that's okay. Everybody has their opinions, and and they're wedded to a certain way. I mean, that's like farmers. It's like, this is the way we've always done it, and it was okay for granddad, so it's good enough for me. But composting can be extremely complex, or it can be one of the most simple things you can do on your property. You don't need a fancy container. Just have a pile and just throw stuff on it. Now, there's ways to make it better, but actually, there's not ways to make it better. There's only ways to make it faster. And that's what people get focused on, is like, well, I'm going to need like 6 wheelbarrows of compost in 6 weeks. So I want to do the super fast, high heat, Princeton, researched composting method. And it's like, okay, but you can do it really slow and it comes out the same way, because it's the same material eaten by the same microbes. It just takes longer, maybe it is wood chips, and wood chips this is why it's kind of rough to depend on them for anything other than mulch, because it takes forever for them to break down, because they're really big pieces, they're really big pieces. And so there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, you have to be patient, don't expect to have a truckload of compost in 6 weeks when you have, a handful of grass clippings and some straw or something. It's just, you just have to be realistic about it. And if you're not in a hurry, it can be the simplest thing you can possibly do. I guess I guess the advice is, and we'll cover this in the composting show that I've already done practically today. Is is start now. Start now. Just start piling stuff up.
Well, this is probably this is probably one of the most important things that everyone can be doing right now. Is to get some kind of to get started building the soils around you, because if you want to be able to grow your own food, it is vitally important that you have good soils.
And if I might add one more thing here with everything we've talked about and ways to improve the soil and improve holding capacity of water, microbes, feeding the soils, all that stuff. In my opinion and from my experience, now if you've got a huge cow pasture and you want to do something that will improve the whole pasture, like you want to spread something, like, I'm not saying don't do that. But if you are doing, like, say, paddock rotation, I think that it is far more valuable to say, all right, I have, let's say, 12 paddocks or whatever it is. I'm going to work on paddock 1 this year. Paddock 1 is my focus. Or I have 3 garden beds. They're little raised beds. That's kind of a smaller scale. You can probably do all them at once. But let's say, you've got that, and then you've got an area, or you're mulching around trees and, trying to get things going. The more you focus on a small area, the faster it will happen. And then that soil, once you get it to a certain point, doesn't need a whole lot of attention. Once you've got it back healthy, it's, pretty much takes care of itself for the most part. And so one of the things we're really trying to focus on as we move on to our property is taking those little spots and just saying, hey, this is the area that we're going to work on, and we're going to get it to where it's supposed to be. Kind of like the, how Jeff Lawton in permaculture talks about when you go out and you do a permaculture design, like in your zone 1, you step outside your front door and you design that first square foot, and then you design all the square feet around that first square foot, and you just keep moving out. Just like with mulching trees, I can tell you this. I learned this from Akiva Silver. If he says he likes to have if he's only got enough mulch to really put 6 to 8 inches of mulch on one side of the tree, that's what he does, rather than spread it out into 4 inches around the whole tree. So if you can do one spot and do it properly and really put the effort into it, you're going to be so much happier with the results. Because I can't tell you how many times I have mulched around a tree and made, just a nice ring around it, and I only put, mulch, say 2-3 inches, and then it's just like you don't get the same results. If I had that same tree and I literally just dumped like a whole wheelbarrow load of rabbit manure on one side of it and just left it in a pile, amazing the results that you get from that. So that's something just to consider when you're going to do this type of stuff. Like John was saying, needing the whole truckload of compost. You don't need a whole truckload of compost. Do it little by little, and that stuff spreads and it heals the land. Just like, when these people plant these forests and, are green in the desert and all that stuff, they start with just a little spot, and little by little, it almost just starts to grow itself. So that's something to consider, is not to try to tackle everything at once and just get one spot to where it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. I agree. You can overwhelm yourself when you try to make enough compost or make a change in the way you're raising crops when you try to do it for everything, especially like you said, if you have 3 or 4 different garden areas, and it may be a lot to take care of, but try one spot, and be patient. It's we like to really, in this modern society, we're really impatient for results,
Instant
and it's like,
gratification. Yeah.
and that's you have to fight against that, and just like, hey, maybe this year wasn't a great year, but maybe the work I did this year will show up next year, as the soil continues to improve, and I fight, rocks are just my nemesis, it's like, how am I even gardening in this soil? It's like I'm literally moving rocks out of the way to stick plants in the soil, it's ridiculous. But as I build up more organic matter with my cover cropping method, that will, the rocks are still there, but the soil gets a lot easier to work with. And, you don't have, because this clay soil we have around here can get pretty rough when it's dry. And, like it is right now. It's ridiculous.
Let's get some rain. So yeah, we're up on an hour for tonight. We want to go around and let everybody know what you got going on. John, where can people find you?
You can find me here on Sunday nights, basically. And like I said, I'm still working on my social media presence. And when I have the big launch, which I'm not really planning, but that's what they use in the vernacular of social media. Once I launch my campaign for, anyway, I'll be here. I'm available. Get with these two knuckleheads. They can find me. It doesn't matter.
We'll hunt them down for you. All right. Logan, where can people find you and support you?
Oh, yeah. YouTube, Hideaway Homestead, easiest way to find me. You can also email me, hideawayhomestead@gmail.com. And those are pretty much the way. I don't have any other social medias. If I might make a suggestion, John, your easiest one would probably be Instagram, because you could just go out there, take pictures of the cows and trees, and you're done.
Yeah,
ones tend to be a little more, unless you do like my style and like stuff like Greg Judy and Edible Acres. I kind of patterned my channel after theirs. It's not about the quality of the video, but really more, I guess, the content, because I'm not a videographer, and my videos are made with a cell phone, and sometimes they're, most of the time they're not really that good. So
hey, you get better.
That's one route you can go.
You keep learning as you go. Keep learning and growing. So don't sell yourself short, Logan, man. You make great content, man. And then you guys can find me here. This is the Tinker Tribe channel. If you like what we're doing here, give us some feedback in the comments. Let us know what you like about these conversations and what we could do better. And we'll keep going on this series. This is fun to get together and talk to both of you guys and pick your brains, because you guys have been doing this stuff for quite a while as well. So with that, guys, we'll catch you guys next time on another Homestead from Scratch. See ya.